So, how many of you have played a video game? And how many of you know what video games are?
Lightly.
Okay. Well, first, a little bit about me. My first video game console was a Super Nintendo Entertainment System, or SNES for short. I spent many years playing games on that console, such as Mario, Star Wars, Donkey Kong, all that fun stuff. But it's hard to believe that there was a time where video game consoles almost disappeared entirely, and I would have never been able to own my SNES. So today I'll be talking about three things. The first one is I'll be talking about the video game crash of 1983, and basically how video gaming itself not video gaming itself, but it almost ended in the 80s. Second thing I'll be talking about is Nintendo and a quick summary of their history up until the 80s. And the final thing I'll be talking about is the creation of the Nintendo Entertainment System and how it saved the console market. And the all-around generalization is that Nintendo helped revive the consumer's faith in video game consoles. Now let's begin with the video game crash of '83 and how the video game console industry almost went extinct in the US. So let's flash back to 1983. Video games was at a very high. One of the main leading consoles was Atari 2600. And basically at the time, everyone wanted a piece of the pie. And that included many different corporations putting out their own video game consoles and many companies putting out their own video games. So there were 12 video game consoles that were being pushed in stores all at once. And there weren't that many regulations when it came to creating/releasing video games. Anyone could make a game and put it out on any console. And the console company couldn't tell them no, causing an oversaturation of gimmicky, poor quality games by anyone. All official games were also very rushed to meet deadlines for holiday releases and ended up blowing up in their faces. One example was from CEO of Atari, Ray Kazar. He described the creation of the ET video game for the Atari as a disaster, as they had 6 weeks to produce, manufacture, and package it in time for the holidays, and none of them liked making it. One good example of rush games. So that's the Atari 2600 for Atari, and that's Pac-Man for the arcade cabinet. So as you can see, you got your classic Pac-Man, but this is Pac-Man for the Atari. That was a prototype released to the public, not even fully finished. It was an unfinished game, sold to everyone, and no one liked it. It even got so bad that the game E.T. I just told you about, in a landfill in New Mexico. Big myth, eventually found a few years ago. So the other part is that because of this, people started to distrust video game companies because you couldn't trust the game because there were no way of finding out if the game was good. You either bought it or heard about it from a friend. There was no magazine or website you can go to check it. And so with all of this, plus the release of home computers like IBM and Apple that could also play games and do computer stuff, yeah, there's no point in getting a game. So video games is at an all-time low, but then came a Japanese company known as Nintendo. Now Nintendo originally started off as a Japanese playing card company in the 1800s, but eventually they rose into the video game province and started releasing arcade games. So they originally started off making cards, but they got their big break when they made Donkey Kong for the arcade cabinets, which made it a household name. But they didn't want to stop there. Let's see. So eventually, by 1984, they released the Famicom, or Family Computer, in Japan. It was their first traditional console, and it only sold in Japan. They wanted to sell in the US, but they couldn't because of the crash of '83. But so far, they were slowly making their rise, and they were really big in Japan and sort of known in the US. But they wanted to sell the Famicom in the US despite what happened. So basically what they did was that they basically rebranded it. So once again, that's the Famicom, but they decided to remake it not as a video game console, but as a entertainment system. This is the Nintendo Entertainment System. It was released in 1985, and it was marketed as something completely different. It wasn't marketed as a video game console. It was marketed as a entertainment system, something for the whole family. They even changed the names of what it is. So for instance, for the Famicom, you have a video game cartridge. But in the US, they were called game packs. That wasn't a console. That was a control deck. As well as they also released all sorts of toys for it, like a light gun and a robot that spins tops, because it's not a video game console. And it turned out it worked. Because according to Nintendo's official website, it sold 60 million units worldwide. Everyone had one, everyone wanted them. And I would say that kind of helped out. So after the NES's releases, they also decided to clamp down on third-party developers by basically saying that unless your game is licensed by us, it's not going out as source. So that helped decline the influx of all these just random games being sold by anyone. So it helped regulate games so they couldn't get another crash. Alright, so as we come to an end, we have covered many things. We've talked about the video game crash of '83 and how the oversaturation of video games have caused a crash that destroyed the US consumer trust in video games. We also talked about the origins of Nintendo and how they got their start in the video game market. And we also talked about the creation of the Nintendo Entertainment System and how it was marketed to the US, restoring faith in video game consoles. So, in other words, Nintendo helped the consumer regain their trust back in video games, and video games kind of entered a rebirth or renaissance in the way things are going. I'd like to end on this note. The video game console industry is a multi-million-dollar industry that does not seem to end anytime soon. And all it took to reach that point was a Japanese company repackaging a red and white console into a gray box.